returning to the period of apartheid, but we are obligated, it seems to me, to develop critiques of the devastation that has been wrought by privatization and deals that have been made with international monetary agencies like the World Bank, like the US and Canada, like Australia, like the UK, like Germany. The institution of the prison, which should have declined in importance since its emergence as a main tool of punishment in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, around the time of the American Revolution. And everybody knows, of course, while America, the US, which oftentimes represents itself as America, which is really, it's not a country. It's a hemisphere, actually. So I have to catch myself every time I say America. But the U.S. was supposedly offered democracy to the world, right? 1776. And as it offered that particular version of democracy, I always talk about bourgeois democracy, because that's what it was. It was capitalist democracy, and actually capitalism and democracy are contradiction in terms, and that's been one of the problems, all of these years. But as it offered democracy to the world, it also offered the prison.
Right.
Because the prison was the underside of democracy. It was the other side of democracy. If democracy involved the fact that all people, all citizens had rights and liberties, then the prison became that tool that constituted the deprivation of rights and liberties as the main form of punishment. So you see how they emerged together. And many people assume that prisons have always been around. Well, they may have been around for a long time, but they were not used as the primary mode of punishment.
Right.
That is a democratic phenomenon. That is a capitalist phenomenon, as a matter of fact. So, one might have assumed that since the early 1800s, by now it would have become obsolete. As a matter of fact, I wrote a little book a few years ago called Are Prisons Obsolete? Because I think that by now they should be obsolete. But the institution acquired a new importance because it provides a way of getting rid of populations of people who have been rendered unnecessary by the development of global profit.
Right.
Populations of people who don't figure into the machine of profit making. Populations of people who can only become profitable if they are made into the raw material for the prison industrial complex.
Right.
Bodies that became the basis for outsourcing products and services for an ever-expanding network of prisons all over the world. Mm-hmm. Now, let's go back and remember that women now constitute the fastest growing sector of prison populations, not only in this part of the world, but all over. And I think if one considers that women from racially subjugated communities, Aboriginal women Australia and Canada, Black indigenous women in the US, women from the global South in Europe, women from immigrant populations in South Africa. Because in South Africa you have a major immigration problem, specifically with people from Mozambique and other parts of Africa. And I mention this because I've been involved for many years in trying to address issues specifically confronting women and thinking about, what kinds of services do women in prison need, and how do we develop ways of addressing the day-to-day needs of women and people in prison against the backdrop of advocating the abolition of imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment. So how do you do the work, the day-to-day work that is going to help people live and develop, and at the same time call for an end to the institution?